Some paintings capture a moment in time, a smile, a pose, a memory frozen forever on canvas. But what happens when the painting refuses to stay frozen? What happens when the image begins to shift, to change, to become something other than what the artist intended? In 1894, a struggling painter named Elias Crowe completed what would be his final work, a portrait of a young woman, beautiful, serene, perfectly still, or so everyone thought. For over a century, that painting remained hidden in darkness, locked away by a family that had good reason to fear it. But when it finally emerged into the light, restoration experts discovered something impossible. The portrait had changed, and it was still changing. This is the story of a painting that should not exist, of an artist who may have captured something more than just an image, and of a young woman who refused to stay painted. Before we continue, if you love stories that make you question reality, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like. Get comfortable, maybe dim the lights, and settle in. Because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after the story ends. Elias Crowe was not a famous painter, not during his life, and not after his death. He was born in 1856 in a small town outside Philadelphia, the son of a printer and a seamstress. He showed talent early, drawing in the margins of newspapers, sketching neighbors from memory. His parents saved money and sent him to study art in Boston when he was 18. He was good. Not great, but good. He had technique. He understood light and shadow, but he lacked the connections, the charm, the business sense that separated successful artists from struggling ones. By 1890, at age 34, Elias was living in a cramped studio in Baltimore, taking whatever commission work he could find, mostly portraits. Wealthy families who wanted paintings of their children, their wives, their estates. Work that paid the rent, but left him feeling hollow. His letters from that period, carefully preserved by a cousin, reveal a man who felt trapped. He wrote about wanting to create something meaningful, something that would last, something that would prove he was more than just a hired hand with a brush. In the spring of 1894, he got what he thought was his chance. The Ashford family hired him to paint their daughter, Catherine Ashford, 19 years old, recently returned from finishing school in Europe. By all accounts, she was lovely, dark hair, pale skin, eyes that contemporaries described as extraordinarily deep. The commission paid well, more than Elias usually made. The Ashfords were old money, connected to shipping interests and real estate throughout Maryland. They wanted a formal portrait to commemorate Catherine's return home, something to hang in the main parlor, something that would announce her availability for marriage to other wealthy families. Elias began the portrait in May of 1894. Catherine sat for him 3 times a week in the Ashford family sitting room, a space with tall windows that let in good natural light. She wore a deep blue dress with a high collar. Her hair was pulled back, her hands folded in her lap. According to Elias's notes, the early sessions went well. Catherine was a patient subject, quiet, still. She rarely spoke, which Elias appreciated. It let him focus on his work. But by the 4th week, something changed. In a letter to his cousin dated June 15th, Elias wrote, "The girl watches me even when I am not looking at her. I can feel her eyes on my hands, on my face. It is most unsettling. I have painted dozens of subjects and never felt this way before." A week later, another letter. "I asked her to look away, to focus on the window as I worked on her hands. But when I glanced up, she was staring directly at me. She smiled when our eyes met and said she liked watching me work. There is something unnatural about her attention." The final letter, dated July 2nd, was shorter, more urgent. "I cannot explain it, but I feel she is trying to put herself into the painting. Not just her image, but something more, something of her will, her presence. I have started having dreams where I am the one being painted, and she holds the brush. I will finish this commission as quickly as possible and never work for this family again." Elias completed the portrait on July 9th, 1894. He delivered it to the Ashford home that same afternoon, collected his payment, and left. 3 days later, he was found dead in his studio. The official cause was heart failure. He was 38 years old. There was no autopsy, no investigation, just a quiet funeral attended by a handful of people who barely knew him. The Ashford family hung the portrait in their parlor as planned, Catherine wearing her blue dress, staring out from the canvas with an expression that was both serene and somehow unsettling. But within a month, the family took the painting down. According to a diary entry from Catherine's mother, Margaret Ashford, dated August 20th. We have removed Catherine's portrait to the attic. The servants refuse to clean the parlor when it is present. They say the eyes follow them. More concerning, my husband swears the expression changes depending on the time of day. I myself have noticed that the smile seems more pronounced in evening light. We thought it best to store it away. The portrait remained in the Ashford attic for the next 129 years. The family never displayed it again, never mentioned it. When Catherine herself died in 1942 at age 67, her children chose not to hang it at the funeral. It stayed locked away, wrapped in cloth, gathering dust in the darkness. The Ashford line ended in 2015. The last surviving member, Catherine's great-granddaughter, died without children. The estate was liquidated. Everything sold at auction. Most of the family's possessions went to dealers and collectors, but there was one box that nobody wanted, a sealed wooden crate from the attic, labeled only MISC, Portraits and Frames. It sat unsold through 3 auctions before a small art restoration company in Richmond, Virginia, bought it for $75. They were hoping for salvageable frames, maybe a painting or two worth cleaning up for resale. When they opened the crate, they found 4 damaged landscapes, 2 broken frames, and 1 portrait wrapped in yellowed cloth. A young woman in a blue dress, dark hair, pale skin, and eyes that seemed to look right through you. The signature in the bottom right corner read, E. Crowe, 1894. Nobody at the restoration lab had ever heard of Elias Crowe, but the painting was in remarkably good condition for something over a century old. The canvas was intact. The paint hadn't cracked or faded significantly. They decided to restore it, clean it up, see if it might be worth something. That decision would change everything. The restoration lab was run by a woman named Dr. Jennifer Hawthorne. She was 42, with 15 years of experience in art conservation. She'd worked on pieces in major museums, restored paintings worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, taught graduate courses in chemical analysis of historical pigments. She'd seen everything, or so she thought. Her assistant was a graduate student named Marcus Chen, 26 years old, working on his thesis about 19th century American portrait techniques. He was meticulous, patient, good with details. They began work on the Crowe portrait in March of 2023. The first step was documentation. Photograph the painting from every angle under normal light, UV light, raking light. Record every crack, every discoloration, every imperfection. Create a complete baseline before touching anything. Marcus spent 2 days on the initial photography. When he showed Jennifer the results, she noticed something odd. "Look at the pupils," she said, pointing at the high-resolution images on the monitor. Marcus leaned closer. "What about them?" "They're not quite circular. See? They're slightly ovoid, like they're dilated unevenly." "Could just be the artist's technique. Not everyone painted perfectly round pupils." "Maybe." But Jennifer pulled up reference images of other Crowe paintings. The few examples they could find online showed he typically painted very precise circular pupils. This was different. She zoomed in on the woman's eyes. Under magnification, the pupils seemed to have depth to them, layers of black and brown paint creating an almost 3-dimensional effect. It was skillfully done, but unusual for the period. "Let's do the UV scan," Jennifer said. "Ultraviolet light reveals things invisible to the naked eye. Old varnish layers, previous restorations, sometimes even hidden signatures or dates that had been painted over. They wheeled the UV lamp into position and dimmed the room lights. When Jennifer switched on the lamp, the painting began to glow with the characteristic purple-blue light, and immediately both of them saw it. Behind the woman in the blue dress, barely visible, was the faint outline of another figure. "Is that another person?" Marcus asked. Jennifer moved closer, adjusting the angle of the UV light. The figure became slightly clearer. Tall, standing directly behind the woman's right shoulder. The details were too faint to make out facial features, but the shape was unmistakable. "It's definitely a figure," Jennifer said. "Looks like Crowe painted over someone. Maybe he reused the canvas." But as she studied the image, something bothered her. The underlying figure wasn't just behind the woman. It was positioned as if it was looking over her shoulder, looking at something in front of her, looking at the viewer. "That's unusual positioning for an underpainting," Marcus said. "If he was just reusing canvas, you'd expect the old image to be oriented differently. But this looks intentional, like it's part of the composition." Jennifer took dozens of UV photos from different angles. In some images, the hidden figure seemed more prominent. In others, it nearly disappeared. "We need to do pigment analysis," she said. "I want to know what he used for that underlying layer." Over the next week, they took microscopic samples from different areas of the painting, just tiny flecks of paint, too small to be visible damage, but enough to analyze chemically. The results were strange. The visible portrait, the woman in the blue dress, used pigments common to the 1890s: lead white, Prussian blue, raw umber, ivory black. Everything matched what Elias Crowe would have had access to. But the underlying figure used different materials. Older formulations, paint mixtures more common to the 1870s or 80s. And something else, an unusual organic compound mixed into the black paint. Something Jennifer's analysis couldn't quite identify. "It's like he painted this twice," Marcus said. "Once years before, and then again later." "Or someone else painted the underlayer," Jennifer suggested. "Could be he bought an old canvas with something already on it." "Then why paint the second figure in almost the exact same position? Look." Marcus pulled up both UV and normal light images side by side. "The head position is nearly identical. Same angle, same proportions. It's the same woman." Jennifer stared at the images. Marcus was right. Despite being separated by layers of paint and possibly years of time, both figures were the same person, same pose, same composition. Like Elias Crowe had painted the same portrait twice. But why? Jennifer decided to search for information about Elias Crowe and the Ashford family. She spent evenings going through online archives, historical records, old newspaper databases. What she found made her uneasy. There were 3 newspaper mentions of Elias Crowe. The first was an advertisement for portrait services from 1891. The second was a brief notice of his death in July 1894. The third was stranger, a letter to the editor published in a Baltimore paper in June of 1894. Written by Crowe himself. It was brief, almost frantic in tone. "To those who commission portraits, I offer this warning. Demand to see the canvas before work begins. Demand to know its history. Some surfaces carry impressions that cannot be erased, and some subjects leave marks that persist beyond the brush. I have learned this truth too late. E. Crowe." The letter made no sense. It sounded like the rambling of someone unwell, but it was dated just weeks before Crowe completed the Ashford portrait. Jennifer also found records of Catherine Ashford, birth certificate, death certificate, a brief obituary from 1942 that mentioned her quiet life devoted to charity work and family. But she also found something else, a death notice from 1894. July 1st, Catherine Ashford, age 19. Died unexpectedly. Cause not stated. Funeral private. Jennifer read the date 3 times to make sure she wasn't mistaken. Catherine Ashford died on July 1st, 1894. Elias Crowe signed and delivered her portrait on July 9th, 8 days after she was dead. "Marcus," Jennifer called. "You need to see this." He came over to her desk. She showed him the death notice. "That can't be right," Marcus said. "He painted her portrait. He must have finished it before she died." "Then why did he date and sign it July 9th? Why deliver it a week after she was buried?" Marcus had no answer. Jennifer pulled up the photos of the painting again. The woman in the blue dress. Serene, smiling slightly. very much alive. "We need to look at the underlayer more carefully," Jennifer said. The next phase of restoration required removing the old varnish layer. This was delicate work. The varnish protected the paint beneath it, but over time it yellowed and darkened, changing how the colors appeared. Modern restoration techniques could remove it carefully, revealing the original colors underneath. Jennifer and Marcus worked slowly, section by section, using gentle solvents and soft brushes. They started with the background, away from the woman's face and dress, where any mistakes would be less noticeable. As the varnish came away, the colors brightened. The deep brown background became warmer, more amber. Details emerged that had been hidden under the yellowed coating. But something else emerged too. The background architecture, what they'd thought were simple dark shapes suggesting a room interior, began to resolve into specific forms. Columns, carved stone, decorative elements that looked familiar. "That's cemetery architecture," Marcus said quietly. "Those are mausoleum columns." Jennifer stopped working and looked more carefully. He was right. The background wasn't a sitting room. It was a cemetery structure, classical revival style, common in American graveyards of the late 19th century. "Why would he paint her in front of a tomb?" Marcus asked. Jennifer didn't answer. She just kept working, carefully removing more varnish. As they moved toward the figure itself, toward the woman's face and dress, the image began to change in ways that made Jennifer's hands shake. The woman's expression was different. Under the yellowed varnish, her smile was gone. Her lips were pressed together, neutral, almost sad, and her head was tilted, just slightly, maybe 15 degrees to the right. In the varnished version, she'd been looking straight ahead. But underneath, she was looking at something off to the side, looking at something the viewer couldn't see. "This isn't possible," Marcus whispered. "The varnish doesn't change the underlying paint. It can't." But it had, or something had. They finished removing the varnish from the face and stepped back to look at the complete image. The woman in the blue dress, still beautiful, still pale, but no longer smiling, no longer looking at the viewer. Her expression was distant, absent, and her eyes. The depth Jennifer had noticed before was even more pronounced now. The pupils seemed to have genuine dimension, like they extended into the canvas instead of just sitting on its surface. "We need to do the infrared scan," Jennifer said. Her voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the tension in it. Infrared imaging could see through layers of paint, revealing what lay underneath. They'd used it before on the painting, but only briefly. Now they needed detailed scans. They set up the infrared camera and began the imaging process. It took hours, capturing the canvas inch by inch, building up a complete picture of what lay beneath the surface. When the scan was complete, they uploaded the images to the computer. Marcus assembled them into a complete view, and then they both stared in silence. The underlayer was another portrait, full detail, complete composition. The same woman, Catherine Ashford, but wearing different clothing. Black dress, high collar, long sleeves, formal, funeral attire. She was posed the same way, hands folded, head slightly tilted. But her expression in the underlayer was different again, more serene, eyes closed. She looked peaceful. She looked dead. "He painted her corpse," Marcus said. "That's a post-mortem portrait. Families used to commission them when someone died. A last photograph, but painted." Jennifer nodded slowly. She'd seen post-mortem portraits before. They were common in the 19th century, especially for children and young people, a way to preserve memory before photography became widespread. But this was different. "He painted her dead," Jennifer said, "and then he painted her alive over it." "Why would he do that?" She zoomed in on the face in the infrared scan, on the closed eyes, the peaceful expression. And then she saw something that made her stop breathing. The eyes weren't completely closed. There was a thin line of white visible between the lids, just barely, like Catherine was peeking, like she was watching through nearly closed eyes. "Marcus, look at this." He leaned in, saw what she was seeing. That could just be how he painted it. Post-mortem portraits sometimes showed eyes slightly open. Now look at the top layer. Jennifer pulled up the normal photograph of the painting. The woman's open eyes, staring forward. The pupils were in the exact same position as the thin line of white in the underlayer, like she'd opened her eyes wider, like the painting had opened its eyes. "This isn't possible," Marcus said again, but he was backing away from the monitor now, away from the painting sitting on the easel across the room. Jennifer pulled up the historical records again, the dates, the timeline. Catherine Ashford died July 1st, 1894. But according to the Ashford family letters Jennifer had found in a historical society archive, Elias Crowe had been painting Catherine's portrait since May, for over 2 months, which meant he'd been painting her while she was alive and then kept painting after she was dead. Jennifer found more letters. These were from Margaret Ashford to her sister, dated July through August 1894. July 5th. Mr. Crowe has refused to abandon the portrait despite Catherine's passing. He says he must complete it. He seems quite agitated, almost obsessed. I have agreed to let him finish, as the painting is nearly done and we have paid him already. July 10th. Mr. Crowe delivered the portrait yesterday. It is beautiful, and yet something about it troubles me. Catherine looks alive in it, but not as she was. Something in the eyes seems wrong, too aware, too present. July 12th. I learned today that Mr. Crowe has died. Heart failure, they say. I cannot help but think of how haggard he looked when he brought us the portrait, like he had not slept in days. August 3rd. The servants insist the portrait watches them. I have observed it myself and can almost understand their fear. In morning light she seems peaceful, but in evening, particularly by candlelight, her expression changes. She seems almost alive. We are considering removing it from view. August 20th. We have stored the portrait in the attic. I cannot bear to look at it. It is not my daughter in that painting. It is something wearing her face. Jennifer sat back. He painted her dead. Then he painted her alive over it, and somehow the underlying image is affecting the surface. That's not how paint works, Marcus said. But his voice was weak, uncertain. Jennifer stood up and walked over to the painting on the easel. The woman in the blue dress, no longer smiling after the varnish removal, head tilted slightly, eyes deep and somehow wrong. She looked at those eyes for a long time. And in the bright fluorescent light of the restoration lab, she could swear they were looking back. Jennifer and Marcus spent the next week researching everything they could find about post-mortem portraits, about Elias Crowe, about the Ashford family, about 19th century painting techniques. They were looking for a rational explanation. Some technique Crowe might have used that would explain the layering. Some chemical reaction between the paint layers that could create the illusion of change. But they found nothing that fit. Jennifer contacted colleagues at other institutions, showed them the images, asked if they'd ever seen anything similar. No one had. One professor of art history at Yale pointed out something Jennifer had missed. In the infrared scan, in the underlayer with Catherine in funeral clothes, there was text, faint, almost invisible, but definitely there. Along the bottom edge of the canvas, beneath where the surface portrait covered it, were words painted in thin, careful letters. She would not stay still. Jennifer showed Marcus. That's Crowe's handwriting. I've seen his letters. That's definitely him. What does it mean? I think, Jennifer said slowly, he tried to paint her the way dead people were supposed to be painted. Peaceful, still, at rest. But something went wrong. She wouldn't stay that way in the painting. Paintings don't have will, Marcus said. They don't do anything. They're just paint and canvas. Then why did he paint over it? Why add a second layer showing her alive? Marcus had no answer. They found more family records. Diaries from Catherine's siblings. Letters from relatives who'd visited the Ashford home over the decades. And in those documents a pattern emerged. Multiple people mentioned the portrait, mentioned how it seemed to change. 1897, Catherine's brother. Mother keeps the painting covered now. Says she saw Catherine's expression change from sad to angry when no one else was in the room. 1912. A cousin. They showed me the portrait from the attic. I swear the girl in it looked different than when I'd seen it as a child. Older, perhaps, or perhaps just more aware. 1931. Catherine's daughter. I found my mother's portrait in the attic. I remember it from when I was young. But something is different. She seems to be looking at a different point now. The angle of her face has shifted. 1956. Catherine's granddaughter. We had an appraiser look at the old portrait. He said it was worthless, but he seemed disturbed by it. Said he felt watched the entire time he examined it. The pattern was consistent. Everyone who saw the painting over the years reported that it had changed in some way. Subtle changes, but changes nonetheless. Jennifer made a decision. They would document the painting as completely as possible. Every technique they had, every form of analysis, chemical sampling, X-ray, infrared, ultraviolet, multispectral imaging. They would create a complete record of what the painting was right now, in this moment, because Jennifer was starting to believe that it wouldn't stay this way. They worked 18-hour days for a week. Marcus thought Jennifer was becoming obsessed, but he helped anyway, because part of him needed to know too. The final piece of analysis was thermal imaging. They'd saved it for last because it required special equipment they had to rent, a high-resolution thermal camera that could detect minute temperature variations across the surface of the painting. Different pigments absorbed and radiated heat differently. The technique could reveal underlying structures, previous restorations, even the specific order in which paint layers had been applied. They set up the camera and the controlled heat lamps, brought the painting to a specific temperature, then monitored how it cooled. The thermal image appeared on the monitor in false colors. Blues for cooler areas, reds and yellows for warmer, and what they saw made no sense. The woman's eyes showed a higher temperature than the surrounding paint, significantly higher, as if they were generating their own heat. "That's impossible," Marcus said. It was becoming his standard response. Jennifer checked the equipment, recalibrated, ran the test again. Same result. The eyes were warmer than they should be. She moved the thermal camera closer, zoomed in on just the face, and she saw something else. The temperature of the eyes was changing, slowly. Over the course of minutes, they were getting warmer, as if they were responding to being observed. "Turn off the camera," Marcus said suddenly. His voice was sharp. "Turn it off now." Jennifer looked at him. His face was pale. "What's wrong?" "Just turn it off, please." She switched off the thermal camera. The monitor went dark. Marcus was staring at the painting on the easel, at the woman's face. "What did you see?" Jennifer asked. "When you zoomed in, when the camera focused on the eyes, I was looking at the actual painting, not the monitor. And the pupils dilated." Jennifer felt cold. "That's not possible." "I know, but I saw it, just a little bit. But they definitely changed size." Jennifer turned back to the painting, the woman in the blue dress, head slightly tilted, eyes deep and dark and looking at something off to the side, or maybe not off to the side anymore, maybe looking at them. "We need to finish this restoration and get it into controlled storage," Jennifer said. "Something about observation is affecting it. The more we look, the more we analyze, the more it changes." That night, Jennifer couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Elias Crowe, about his letter to the editor, about his warning about surfaces that carried impressions. She thought about Catherine Ashford, dead at 19, painted twice, once dead, once alive. And she thought about how the painting seemed to be becoming more aware with each analysis, more present, more real, like something was waking up. The next morning, she and Marcus completed the restoration. They didn't revarnish the painting, didn't do any more analysis, just documented its current state and prepared it for storage. Before they sealed it away, Jennifer took one last photograph, high resolution, full documentation. She looked at the image on her camera screen, and she saw that the woman in the blue dress was no longer looking off to the side. She was looking straight ahead now, looking directly at the camera, looking directly at Jennifer. The portrait of Catherine Ashford now resides in a climate-controlled storage facility in Richmond, Virginia. It's kept in a sealed case with controlled humidity and temperature. Most importantly, it's kept in complete darkness. The restoration was never completed. Jennifer Hawthorne wrote a report documenting everything they'd found, but she recommended against any further work on the painting. She recommended it be stored indefinitely under conditions that would prevent deterioration, but also prevent observation. Because observation, she concluded, was the key. Every time someone looked at the painting, really looked at it, studied it, analyzed it, it changed, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but it changed. The more attention it received, the more present the subject became. Jennifer included all their documentation in the report, all the scans, the analysis, the historical records. She noted the thermal anomaly in the eyes. She noted the testimony of family members over a century about the painting changing. And she noted one final detail that she'd discovered in the last weeks of research. Catherine Ashford died on July 1st, 1894. The official cause was listed as heart failure. But Jennifer found a letter from the family doctor to Margaret Ashford dated 2 days later. In it, he expressed confusion about Catherine's death. He wrote, "I examined your daughter just days before her passing and found her in excellent health. The sudden failure of her heart is most unusual in one so young. Moreover, when I was called to confirm her death, I found certain peculiarities I hesitate to mention. Her eyes, though closed at the moment of death, appeared to have opened at some point afterward. The positioning of the lids suggested this. Most unusual. I can offer no medical explanation. Catherine's eyes had opened after death, just like they opened in the painting. Jennifer didn't include her personal theory in the official report, but she wrote it down in her private notes, notes she kept locked in a safe in her home. She believed that Elias Crowe had done something when he painted that second layer, something intentional or perhaps accidental, but he'd created a connection between the painted image and the woman it depicted, a connection that persisted after death. And every time someone observed the painting, that connection grew stronger. The painted Catherine became more aware, more present, more alive. Jennifer believed that if someone studied the painting long enough, observed it carefully enough, gave it enough attention, something would eventually cross through that connection. Something that had been dead for over a century would find a way back. That's why the painting had to stay in darkness, unsealed, unwatched. Because some images are more than just paint on canvas. Some portraits capture more than just appearance, and some subjects never truly let go of their desire to be seen. Marcus Chen left the restoration field 6 months after they finished work on the Crowe portrait. He said he wanted to pursue other interests, but Jennifer knew the truth. He'd had nightmares ever since that day with the thermal camera, dreams where he was painting, and the subject watched him with Catherine Ashford's eyes. Jennifer still works in restoration. She's good at her job, but she's careful now about what projects she takes on. She always researches the provenance first, always checks if there's any history of the piece being unusual or disturbing. She'll never work on another portrait from the 1890s, not Elias Crowe's work, not anyone's. She knows better now. The storage facility where the painting is kept has strict protocols. Only authorized personnel can access it. It cannot be photographed. It cannot be displayed. It cannot be studied without special permission, which has never been granted. The facility's records show that the painting is checked once a year to ensure it's not deteriorating. These checks are performed as quickly as possible. Open the case. Visual inspection lasting no more than 30 seconds. Close the case. Document the results. The inspection reports are brief, always the same. Painting remains in stable condition. No signs of deterioration. No change observed. But Jennifer reads those reports carefully every year, and she notices something the inspectors might not. The description of the subject's pose changes slightly, year by year. Little details. In 2023, subject facing forward, head slightly tilted right. In 2024, subject facing forward, head nearly straight. In 2025, subject facing forward, eyes directed at viewer. The changes are subtle, could be different inspectors describing the same thing in different words, could be nothing. But Jennifer doesn't think it's nothing. She thinks the painting is still changing, even in the darkness, even without constant observation, slowly, patiently, but still changing, still moving forward, still becoming more present. And sometimes, late at night in her apartment, Jennifer thinks about the painting locked away in that storage facility. She thinks about Catherine Ashford, dead at 19, painted twice, trapped in layers of paint and canvas. She thinks about how the painting reacted to being observed, how it warmed under thermal imaging, how the pupils dilated when watched closely. She thinks about what might happen if someone studied it long enough, if someone gave it the attention it seemed to want, the connection it seemed to be seeking. Would Catherine Ashford finally be able to step out of that frame? Would something that had been dead for 130 years find a way back to life? Jennifer doesn't know, and she's grateful that no one is willing to find out. The painting stays locked away, kept in darkness, observed as little as possible, because some questions shouldn't be answered, some mysteries shouldn't be solved, and some portraits should never be allowed to finish what they started. The last entry in Jennifer's private notes, dated 3 months ago, reads simply, "Received this year's inspection report. Inspector noted that the subject's expression appears more alert than in previous years, more aware. He felt uncomfortable during the inspection and completed it in under 20 seconds. He has requested not to be assigned to this painting again. I have approved his request. We will need a new inspector next year. Someone who hasn't seen it before, someone it doesn't recognize yet. Because that's the other thing Jennifer has come to believe. The painting remembers. It remembers everyone who looks at it, everyone who studies it, everyone who gives it attention. And it's waiting, patiently, quietly, in the darkness, waiting for someone to look long enough, to care enough, to give it what it needs, whatever that is. The portrait of Catherine Ashford remains in storage, in darkness, unchanged to casual observation, but changing nonetheless. Always changing, always watching, even when no one is watching it. Always waiting for the moment when someone finally looks long enough. And if you ever find yourself in a museum, in a gallery, in an antique shop, and you see a portrait that seems just a little too aware, that watches you just a little too carefully, that makes you feel uncomfortable in a way you can't quite explain, walk away. Don't study it. Don't give it your attention. Because some paintings want more than just to be seen. They want to see you back, and once they do, they never quite forget. Sleep well, and maybe keep the lights on tonight.